Hi everyone. Just before we officially get started, just a couple of housekeeping points. So today's seminar will be recorded. It'll be available on the AWRC YouTube channel in the next week or so, and we'll let you know when that's live. You'll be muted throughout this to avoid disruptions, but if you want to ask a question or make a point for any of our speakers throughout the session, please use the chat function. Speakers will respond to some of these questions at the end of their presentation, and that will be managed as part of the seminar. We will start the seminar in 2 minutes' time, and a reminder that the seminar will be recorded. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second AWRC public seminar series. This focuses on physical activity across the cancer treatment pathway. My name's Rob Copeland. I'm the director of the AWRC, and I'm delighted to welcome colleagues from across Sheffield University, the University of Sheffield, and also Sheffield Teaching Hospitals as part of today's seminar. For anyone unfamiliar with the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre, we're a strategic research centre at Sheffield Hallam. We have a mission to transform lives through innovations that help people move. And we opened in January 2020. We're located on the Sheffield Olympic Legacy Park in the east of Sheffield. We're part of the community of Darnall. And our model of research is one of collaboration, co-production, and co-location, where we bring together communities, businesses, clinical services, and the public sector with multiple academic expertise in health, engineering, robotics, software design, psychology, sport exercise science, and the arts to undertake world-leading research in physical activity. Our public seminar series runs every couple of months, so do keep an eye on the AWRC socials, I think as the kids say, or the website. Our Twitter handle is @SHU_AWRC, and all the information for future sessions will be found on there. In terms of today's session, it's hosted by one of our research themes, Living Well with Chronic Disease, and this is headed up by Dr. Caroline Dalton and Liam Humphreys. This cross-disciplinary group develops research that utilises exercise as a therapy, supporting people living with chronic diseases to manage their condition, remain independent for longer as they age, and also improve quality of life. Today's session focuses on physical activity across the cancer treatment pathway, and Caroline and Liam are joined by a fantastic lineup of speakers, and it includes our very own Active Together service, our flagship programme in collaboration with Sheffield Teaching Hospitals and Yorkshire Cancer Research. If you want to know more about that programme, again, head to our website. But without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Caroline and Liam, who will introduce their work and also today's speakers. Caroline, Liam, over to you.
Great, thanks very much for the introduction, Rob. Liam, have you got our starter slides to share?
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, is that up? Yeah.
Oh yes, okay.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for the introduction, Rob. So as Rob said, Liam and I co-lead the Living Well with Chronic Disease theme, and this is one of 3 themes at the AWRC. So just before we go into today's session, we thought we'd just tell you what goes on in the theme. So next slide, please, Liam. So the aim and objective of the theme is to build cross-disciplinary teams and using a whole systems approach to support and address challenges of facilitating people living with chronic disease to move more. We're attempting to build evaluative and analytical capacity to study activity and well-being in people with chronic disease. We're very much into co-design and very much into sustainable interventions that address challenges. And based in Darnall, it's very important. Something we bear in mind is about reducing inequalities, increasing quality of life, reducing burden of disease. And so Liam and I, really one of our key roles is to coordinate and build research activity and support researchers. So it's not that we do all the work ourselves by any means. It's about having a coordinating role and a supporting role in increasing research activity under our theme. So if you think that you have research that comes under our theme and you'd be interested in discussing collaborations with us, we're very keen always to expand what we're doing and build new collaborations. Next slide, Liam. So I think you're going to...
Yeah, that's me now. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Liam Humphreys, the co-leader of the theme and also senior research fellow at the AWRC. So our theme, we've got 4 sort of areas of research where we focus on, which is cancer, long COVID, musculoskeletal health, and also neurological conditions. Today, obviously, we're going to focus on the cancer projects, and we're going to have some speakers today who give examples of some of the research that's within the portfolio. In terms of what we do within our theme, is what we want to do is, as Caroline just touched on, is build teams, build collaborations, try and integrate within existing structures, build research infrastructures, scope key projects, and also build databases and cohorts as well to answer different research questions. So today we've got 4 speakers for this seminar. It was quite ambitious, trying to fit 4 into the session, so we're going to be going quite quickly through each. Each presentation will be about 10 minutes long, with a little bit of time afterwards for questions as we go through. And as Rob said, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. If we don't get through to all the questions, we will then send out answers following the seminar. So if that's okay, we'll make a start with the first speaker. So our first speaker is Carol Keane, and she is a consultant physiotherapist and also clinical lead of the Active Together service. So I'll stop sharing now so Carol can get hers ready.
Okay, so hopefully you can see my slides okay there. I can't see you, so if not, give me a shout. So thank you for having me along today to talk about Active Together. Active Together is a cancer prehabilitation and rehabilitation service that runs out of the AWRC and is a collaboration between Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, Sheffield Hallam University and Yorkshire Cancer Research. So the principle behind prehabilitation in patients with cancer is that we know and understand how detrimental cancer and its treatments can be to the health of patients on by whatever measure that health is taken. And with prehabilitation, we can improve patients' health status before they start their treatment, which allows them to better tolerate their treatment and to have better outcomes at the end of it. With rehabilitation on top of that, we can hope to recover patients to the level of function that they were at before and even beyond that, rather than seeing that steady decline that might be the case if patients go into treatment without prehab and come out without rehab, as is very often the case. So this is how we deliver our prehab and rehab within Active Together. Our first stage is prehabilitation. We pick our patients up as soon as we can after their cancer diagnosis, and we start working with them up until the point that their treatment starts. Treatment is varied. It might be that they have chemotherapy, surgery, more chemotherapy. It might be that they only have surgery. Absolutely depends on the individual circumstance. And during that time, we would support them to stay as active as they can and to help to continue to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Once treatment's finished, we move into a phase of restorative rehabilitation, which is for about 3 months, where we're rehabbing the patient and getting them back on their feet and back going again. And then at the end of that 3 months, we move into what we call a supportive phase, where we're really handing off to the patients themselves so that they can, where they are managing their own activity, exercise, doing that within their community setting with very long arm support from us. There's a very large evaluation running alongside Active Together. And so each of these grey boxes along the top is an assessment point for the patient, where we capture information around their physical ability, things like 6-minute walk test, grip strength. And we capture questionnaire information about anxiety, depression, dietary information, quality of life, and so on. So we've got many, many data points that we're gathering about the patients along the way. So the service design is sort of depicted in this one picture here. I've mentioned before that it's a collaboration between the 3 organisations. We see patients who are Sheffield patients, so that's patients whose treatment is being managed in Sheffield, whether that treatment is surgical or non-surgical, and where the treatment intent is curative, so those patients who are on a curative or radical treatment pathway for their cancer. We started working with patients who are in the upper GI tumour groups, as well as lung and colorectal. And we are extending into urology and head and neck over the next year or so. And then the year after that, we're planning to move into other tumour groups and extend into there. And then our offering is multimodal. So we support patients with physical activity and exercise. We offer dietetic support, and we offer psychological support, because those are the 3 main components that can challenge patients, but we also know how closely those are all integrated as well, in terms of patients being able to manage one and or not the other. Each patient's care is individualized and personalized as much as we are able to do that. And we do that in loads of different ways. So for example, everybody is assessed at different points along the way, and their needs are identified and stratified. So we would identify whether people have specialist needs, more complex patients perhaps with comorbidities, or targeted needs, or more universal and able to manage some of their activities, exercise, diet, well-being for themselves. And then we sort of match the offering to them within that. So people might be have specialist needs for physical activity. They might be universal for diet. They might have targeted needs for their well-being, and we try and meet their needs. We very much focus on what matters to you for the patient, and on asking rather than what's wrong with you. And we ask the patient that question at different points along their journey. So again, we can tailor what we offer them to meet their needs, to meet their goals, to meet what their priorities are at that point in their cancer treatment, and knowing that that can change as they go through their treatment as well. And then we have a model of behaviour change integrated throughout what we offer, in terms of how we train our staff, how we manage our patients, how we support them, and components of our intervention as well. We recognise that telling patients with cancer who've just been diagnosed, who are waiting for surgery, that they need to exercise more, stop smoking and eat well isn't as simple as telling them to do that, that we need to help to support them to make those changes in their behaviour, unpick the barriers and obstacles, and help them to move their way through that. So as well as being an excellent and amazing clinical service, which we know Active Together to be, we also see it as an opportunity for to generate high quality research. So we have a pool of patients who are moving through this service. To date, we've recruited around 300 patients into Active Together, and that's since February. So we have this pool of patients who are in our service, who are moving through our service, who are at the different phases of that, and that's only going to continue to grow. These are all patients who have cancer, who've got a cancer diagnosis, and who are undertaking exercise, diet changes, behaviour change with us and with our support. And so there's a real potential there for other research, as well as the evaluation that we're doing for other different types of research projects, to happen in and around Active Together. So there's that access to patients which can generate the research. We also have a mixed team. We've got clinicians with research expertise, and we've got team staff within the team from Sheffield Hallam as well, with their own research expertise and skills. And so we're a clinical service sitting within a university site with a rich knowledge of research within it. We are seeing patients with their cancer before they're treated and after they're treated, as well as through their treatment. So there's an opportunity for research that might be at a particular time point, or that might map and follow patients as they go through that journey. Ours is a multimodal intervention, so there's the opportunity to explore patients who are going through physical activity, patients who are being supported psychologically, patients who are being supported through dietetic intervention. And then with Liam and Caroline, what we've done is set up a sort of research oversight group where we will look at research opportunities and ideas that staff bring to us at the very earliest point. So anything that people are thinking about, I think I could do some research here. I think I could do that within Active Together. What we'd say to you is come and see us, come and speak to us. We've got like a little template pro forma that we would ask you to fill out so that we can discuss that, and we can discuss that with you and feedback and work out how best that research can fit in along the service delivery model without being disruptive, maybe without duplicating other research endeavour that's happening, so that we're not being siloed, we're connecting people with each other, and then we can help you to develop good research questions that are far more likely to get funded because they're well integrated to an active clinical service. And so my last slide is just some research that we've either had funding for already or that's in development. So there's a small study taking place which is to look at the safety of online exercise within Active Together compared to face-to-face exercise, to see what sort of level of adverse events there are with those two modes of exercise, for us to be able to say whether we could confidently say that online exercise is safe or not in this patient group. We're looking at the potential impact of change in weight ahead of surgery. Lots of patients who are overweight get told that they should lose weight before their surgery, but we're not aware of any evidence that suggests that leads to better outcomes. So we're having looking at investigating that. We're looking to compare the acceptability and feasibility of high intensity exercise compared to moderate intensity exercise in patients who are going through prehabilitation, to see if one works better for our patients than another. We're looking at whether measuring body measurement or the accuracy of body measurement in patients who are going to have chemotherapy can impact on their dosage and the treatment outcomes. And then I know Nick is speaking later, but one of the studies we've also supported is looking at the levels of extracellular vesicles in patients who are exercising pre and post exercise in patients with bowel cancer. So a really, really wide range of possible opportunities already, and we've only been really going for 9 months, and in the first few months we weren't even thinking about research because we were so busy setting up a service. So hopefully that allows you to see the potential in what Active Together could offer from a research point of view, and hopefully as you're sitting there, it's starting to make you think about research ideas and opportunities that you want to come and talk to us about as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Carol. That was a great presentation. We haven't got any questions in the chat, so I might ask a couple if that's okay. Can I ask? So far, obviously, we go for 9 months. How many people have been with or have gone through the service? And a sort of second question after that is: are there any plans moving forward to sort of expand the service?
Yeah, so we've got 300 and I think we've had about 320 referrals so far. We get about 80% acceptance rates. So whatever that works out to in the maths into the number of people who are in the service at the moment. Because it's a long process and pathway, because we see people, then they have chemo and then they have surgery and then they have more chemo and then we rehab them. I think maybe this week our very first patient is about to complete to get to the very end of the whole process. We've had a lot of people in prehab, we've had a lot of people in treatment. We're now getting more people into restorative, and we also now have sort of about 20 or 30 people in supportive. So everyone's sort of moving through the pipeline, and we're going to start getting to the point where we've had people who have gone through the whole journey, which is brilliant. In terms of expansion, we've got targets to grow our numbers to see 500 patients in our second year, and then higher numbers beyond that. And some of that growth is going to come from us expanding into the other tumour groups. So we're speaking to, well, the plan is to start by picking up patients who are having some urological surgeries in the next few months, and then head and neck, and expand out to other tumour groups. And then we're also looking at how we can support this service across the region, across South Yorkshire. So we're very Sheffield based, but we're aware that lots of our patients are travelling to us from Rotherham, Barnsley and Doncaster, and we'd much rather they had a local prehab service that's available to them, so that we could support them more easily.
Great, thanks, Carol. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. So one question is, who monitors that the patients aren't being overburdened with research project requests? And then the second question is, are there links to 5K Your Way at Parkrun?
So the first one about overburden, that's really part of the reason we've put sort of in this, the oversight group that Caroline and Liam and I are looking at. So what we want to do in that is, like I said, support people to put together great research, but also to address exactly that, to make sure that studies aren't going to the same group of patients over and over again, that the patients aren't being over-researched, that we're not getting too many questions put to the same patients, and so to try and monitor that in some way. 5K Your Way we were talking about just at lunchtime today. So again, it's sort of probably more suited to that sort of end of that supportive phase and that link. One of the things that we've done in the last couple of months is set up a Facebook group for our patients, encouraging patients to join that, and then starting to use that to suggest ways that they might access local community services, and also to get them to talk to each other. And so we've been posting about 5K Your Way in there as a way that maybe patients might be able to continue to exercise once they've come to the end of their Active Together rehab, and other types of things that are similar in different areas and different regions that might suit different people.
Then we've got a question, which I think the answer to this might be yes. Have we assessed how many people are taking up the offer by deprivation? So, you know, when you said, gave us a percentage of how many people, that's built into the assessment.
Yeah. So we track who's referred to us and who takes the service up against areas of social deprivation. And actually, interestingly, it's quite a U-shaped curve. So we get a lot of referrals and a lot of uptake from patients in the lower areas of social deprivation, fairly high in the areas the other way around. So in the areas of higher social deprivation, that's our greatest number of referrals and uptake, which is encouraging, but we're keeping an eye on that all the way about our health inequalities and data and different ways that we can address that.
So I think we've only got time for one last question, which is, how do you in practice support people to give up smoking, drink less, and eat better, do exercise? And is there any home visit that helps with this, or is it just solely delivered through the visits to Active Together?
No, we don't offer home visits. If we identify somebody, say post-operatively, who's really struggling, we would arrange for a community therapy team to go and see them at home in that bridging time. But we support people either as they come to us, we support them through one-to-ones, through groups, through remote groups. We give people exercise programs to do at home. In practice, the support is tailored and individualized. In practice, we give them the support that we understand them to need, having had the conversation with them. Everybody is different. Some patients are well and are able to exercise, and we might just give them a little bit of extra advice. Some people need to come in, need to spend time with us in the gym, need to be carefully monitored and assessed as they exercise, need us to keep a close eye on them, and we give them that if that's what they need. And similarly with the smoking and drinking and eating better, exercise, dietitians, some of our patients see our dietitian face to face, have regular follow-ups with her, get supplements from her, get close monitoring of their diet. Other patients get some advice on eating healthily, because that's how we based on how we identify their need and level of support.
Great. Thanks again, Carol.
Lovely.
That was fantastic. Liam, are you ready to introduce our next speaker?
Yes. Thank you, Carol. So next up, we have Dr. Nick Peake, who's a senior lecturer in biosciences at Sheffield Hallam University. Hi, Nick.
Hi. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
Yeah, I've got you.
That's good. Okay, I'm just gonna try to share my slides. Just give me a moment. For some reason, I can't put. There it is. Okay, PowerPoint just taking its time. Okay, so a pleasure to speak to you all. Thank you for the invitation. So my name's Dr. Nick Peake. I'm a senior lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University. My caveat here is that I don't have a huge amount of background in the physical activity side of things, but we are now starting to work in this field a little bit, and I'm going to talk through how we've got to that point with my talk today. So I focus my work on bowel cancer, and this is a classic schematic of bowel cancer, how bowel cancer progresses. So starts off as a polyp, a small growth, and then progresses, grows in size. So you get an indication of something that's just growing out of control, eventually becoming big, causing blockages, and eventually, in a lot of cases, eventually spreading to other parts of the body as well. So bowel cancer is the third most common cancer worldwide, the second most common cause of cancer-related mortality, and crucially, the outcome is closely related to the stage of diagnosis. So if you catch the cancer in these earlier stages of growth, the outcomes are much better, treatment outcomes are much better, and you have a much better chance of surviving for a long time. Once you get to later stages of disease, these stages of disease, and particularly when the disease has spread to other parts of the body, then you are in a little bit more trouble in terms of outcomes, and the outcome is actually quite poor. At stage 1, over 90% of patients survive over 5 years, but at stage 3, that's gone down to about 60%. And at stage 4, then you've got fewer than 10 patients surviving for 5 years or more. So when successfully treated, but even when you successfully treat the cancer, my surgical colleagues tell me that there can be very difficult conversations with patients who believe that they are treated and cured, but there is something known as recurrence, where the disease bounces back even when it looks like it's been cured, but you've had curative treatments. So this all points to a need for better treatments, improving treatments, particularly for those advanced stages where outcomes are poor. So I'm a laboratory scientist, a lab monkey, as we sometimes call ourselves. I also sometimes call myself a cell biologist, which means I'm interested in cells and how cells behave. So our team, my team here at SHU, studies how bowel cancer cells behave in the lab. And I've got some example pictures of the kind of things we look at when we look down our microscopes. The studying cells in a lab enables us to assess behaviors like growth. And I've got a picture here where you can see that we put these things into plastic dishes. And we start off with a few cells in a plastic dish, and over time, only a few days, in fact, they grow, and so they start to fill the dish up, and you see how cancers can grow and grow and grow and create that growth that's expanding all the time. We can also look at invasive behavior, and here you've got a pretty picture of some cancer cells moving to a nutrient source through a pore in a matrix here. And also we can study how cancer cells respond to treatments as well. So we've got a picture here of cells labeled blue, which indicates a nice healthy cancer cell, and here we've treated with a drug called oxaliplatin, where the cells start to die, and you can see those indicated in red. So those are quite sort of stalwart basic techniques that we use day in, day out in the lab. But we now know that cancers in the body are more than just a growth of cancer cells. There's involvement of a lot of components, including cells of the body that try to repair and help the cancer, stop the cancer from spreading, cells of the immune system that try to target and kill cancer cells, blood vessels, lots of tissue buildup, something which I'm very interested in. And you can see in this picture here, this adds up to a very, very complex and messy and dense situation. And this complexity makes cancers very hard to treat. So in order to work out how better to treat them, we need better lab models. So when I moved to SHU, I had the help of a couple of very good scientists to help us build better models where we're not just, we're not just looking at cancer cells growing in a dish, but we are growing effectively mini tumors with a lot of this complexity built in. You can see them kind of growing in a matrix here. And so these two guys did all of the work, and then you see this handsome chap here is stealing all the glory by showing what our little gel models look like. So what we know from looking at these complex models is that cancer cell growth and invasion is very carefully coordinated. Cancer cells have developed methods to communicate and convert the things around them, cells around them and tissues around them, to support their own growth, to create an environment in which they can grow, and to turn off systems that might prevent them from growing. And one way in which they do that is something that Carol introduced very briefly at the end of her talk. Then we're very interested in these little what we almost look at as little bubbles of information released by cancer cells, which are called vesicles. They're also known as exosomes, which I need to tell you because a lot of people call them that, and so some of the figures that I've got are calling these things exosomes. And this was a picture that I lifted from a company website showing a cancer cell producing these little bubbles that float across and get into other cells. And this is a way in which cancer cells can change the behavior of these other cells and cause them to adopt behaviors that help the cancer cells and the cancer itself to grow. And as scientists, we see ourselves as these people here sat there with our big microscopes, making everything look big and seeing this process happen. And we can see this process happen because in the early days of coming up to Sheffield, I had my cancer cells in a dish, and with some powerful microscopy, we could see little spots of things being released from our cells and traveling across, finding their way into other cells. And I was very interested to pursue this further. So what we know about these vesicles from the work that we've done is that using our advanced 3D models, we can see that vesicles drive invasion into tissue. So we can take our models, we can put cancer cells on the top of them, and then we can treat our models with cancer. And this is work done by a PhD student in my team, Sonia, who's developed very good models for being able to quantify how much cancers invade into our effectively mini tumours that we're growing in the lab. And when we quantify that, when we turn it into numbers, we can see that when we treat with these extracellular vesicles, exosomes, whatever we wish to call them, then we can increase how invasive the cancers in our experiments become. So because they are very, very small, these vesicles, they can escape from the tumours and they find themselves getting into body fluids. So they find themselves in the blood. They can be detected in the blood. They can be detected in saliva. They can be detected in urine. There are groups in America that believe all cancers will be diagnosed by just taking a saliva sample when we're good enough at detecting these things. And if you can detect them, you can provide information about the cancer. So we have, so this is something that a lot of people are very, very interested in. And in fact, there are clinical trials looking at whether you can diagnose and provide prognostic information on patients with cancer by taking usually a blood sample and doing what's called a liquid biopsy, isolating the vesicles, finding out what they tell us about the stage of disease, and then informing the clinical progression. What being laboratory scientists, we're more interested in what they do to the cells that we're growing in our experiments. And what these two graphs that I'm showing you here demonstrate is that we get very clear differences when we take blood from patients with colorectal cancer compared to when we take blood from healthy control people, basically us, the academics and PhD students in our department. So we're able to see differences in metabolism induced by these vesicles that's different in cancer patients compared to healthy controls. We also see differences in the extent of cell death that we see in our experiments as well. So we've got clear differences that seem to be able to differentiate between what's going on in a bowel cancer patient and what's going on in a non-bowel cancer patient. So that's really interesting, but I want to sort of have my last data slide bringing me back to what we're here to talk about, which is the impact of physical activity and exercise. So we know it is well established that exercise alters the production and the content of these vesicles. So if you remember, I told you that these things were packages of information. They carry lots and lots of things, and those things change when you've had exercise. So these changes can come from muscle tissue, they can come from cardiac tissue, but they get into the blood, and we're very interested in how these changes influence what might then happen to a patient with colorectal cancer. So this is the pilot data. This is the first little indication that we've got that something interesting might be going on. What I'm showing you in this plot is that we can see that there is we can see what happens in terms of cells that we grow in the lab, and their metabolism, their growth rate. When we add a drug to these cells, so oxaliplatin, which is in this bar here, you can see that we've significantly decreased the growth of cancer cells. If we then come in with vesicles that we've taken from someone just before they do some exercise, not much happens. So when you go from this bar to this bar, there's not very much difference. But when you take someone who has done some exercise, then we start to see in some cases, in some patients, that there are differences in how they respond to a drug treatment. In other words, what seems to happen is that the vesicles promote or increase the impact of the drug treatment. So that's really encouraging, because it implies that drug treatment may do something to exercise may do something to the vesicles, which improves the response to chemotherapy in patients. And this is something that we're hoping to pursue with our colleagues and collaborators at Oxford Brookes University, and with Carol, Liam and Tom at the AWRC as well. So this is essentially bench to patient and then back again via exercise, and to understand whether we can inform optimal exercise regimes to support bowel cancer responses. So I've run a little bit over time, so I'll just quickly put up my slides showing my research team, thanking my funders, Bowel Research UK and the Medical Research Council and Animal Free Research UK. And we're hoping that some of these people might fund expanding that study on exercise in colorectal cancer patients. And thank you. Happy to answer any questions in the chat, or if we've got any time now.
Thank you, Nick. Does anybody have any? Oh, just one.
Rob said in the chat, what type of exercise was adopted in the study? I think those am I right in thinking that those samples that you're planning to do the work with Active Together, but those samples were the ones in collaboration from Oxford Brookes, weren't they? So what type of exercise did they do there?
I don't like being asked about exercise by people with much more experience of exercise than me. Yeah, so I as I understand it, this was treadmill. So I can't tell you much more detail other than we did in the figures that we put into our recent funding applications have a full breakdown of kind of the the cardiac output that we looked for and all the rest of it. It was healthy people, healthy volunteers, so probably a PhD student in our collaborators lab at Oxford Brookes, who was made to do a 20-minute workout on a treadmill, and then we took the vesicles, or they took the blood sample before and after. He then isolated the blood at his lab in Oxford Brookes and drove up and dropped them off here 2 days before a grant deadline, and we did the experiment.
So am I right in thinking that one of the experiments you're planning to do with Active Together is to see the differences between different types of exercise? Was that one of the things?
Yeah, and again, I have to thank my I have to thank my collaborator Ryan for his sort of input on the grant on this, because what became apparent as we were writing the application was that an application of this technology would be able to feed back to a patient that a particular given type of exercise was more or less beneficial for their circumstances and their disease and their responses. So we think that that's the power of the technology, is that you can see how patients respond to exercise, and you can tailor accordingly according to what you see from lab measurements and lab outputs, which are quite quick for us to do. So we can get quite a sort of rapid way of feeding back to you guys basically, and saying this may work better and this may be a more suitable regime for this particular person.
So there's a question in the chat. Could you tell us the duration between exercise and treatment? I'm not sure whether that means. Do you understand what they're getting at then?
Yeah. So there's no actual treatment in our study. So we had the cancer chemotherapy response in our study is a lab measurement. So it's a cancer cell growing in the lab. the vesicles came from someone who was healthy before and after they did some exercise. So it's basically a way of looking at whether the vesicles before and after exercise had a different effect on how cancer cells in a lab were responding to treatment. So in terms of the duration between the exercise and the treatment, it was actually several years.
Because they were in the freezer.
Because the samples were frozen into the freezer until we asked whether we could use them.
And then there's the question, which is, what is the minimum dose of exercise required? Which I think I'm going to answer, because I think Liam and I think this is a fascinating question, not just for this application, but across exercise in general. And the answer is that I'm certainly for this. We don't know. But
No.
It's a really important question. Really important question.
It is, and we'd like to be able to use lab measurements as getting a sort of rapid, quick answer to that kind of question. I mean, obviously, a lab test is not going to give you all pieces of information that you're looking for. But if it can give you something quickly, then we think that could be really useful. Again, our collaborators believe that you do not actually need that much exercise, which kind of fits with, I think, what a lot of people believe, that small amounts of frequent exercise are beneficial, not necessarily doing lots and lots of extensive exercise, which is important if you're looking at sick cancer patients.
And so final, I think we've only got time for one more question. What do you think the mechanism is for the exercise effect? So obviously you've showed us quite clearly that you change what's in the vesicles, and then they're sending a different message from the cancer cell to the other cell. But could you sort of expand a little bit on what might be happening?
Not really. That is generally the answer. That's this is it's still a field in its infancy. There are tens of thousands of molecules present in these vesicles. Teasing apart the difference pre and post exercise is what our collaborators are trying to do down at Oxford. And it's going to take a lot of teasing out of what molecules in those vesicles are the ones that are having the impact on the cancer cells. So we don't know that at the moment, and we'd need to explore that more.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Nick. That was brilliant. So Liam, we're ready for it.
That's great, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Dr. Brindley Hapuarachi, a clinical research fellow in translational oncology at the University of Sheffield.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my slides.
Thank you, Brindley.
Great. Can you all see that slide?
Yep.
Brilliant. So, as Liam said, my name's Brindley Hapuarachi, and so by trade I'm a medical oncology doctor over at Weston Park Hospital, but I've taken some time out. I'm currently doing a PhD with the University of Sheffield, and my official title is Clinical Research Fellow in Translational Oncology. The study, or part of my PhD, is where we're looking at this feasibility study and looking into the effects of exercise in boosting the immune system in patients undergoing first-line palliative cancer treatment. So just a little bit of background. So immunotherapy is something that we're focusing on within this project, and immunotherapy has revolutionized cancer care across multiple different cancer settings, and type of immunotherapy being immune checkpoint inhibitors are something that we're focusing on. So these are particular treatments that try to target particular pathways which cancer cells have used to try and evade the immune system. So by blocking these pathways, we can hopefully encourage the recognition of the cancer cells by the immune system and facilitate their destruction. And as I said, it has revolutionized the care, but there's still a long way to go. So actually less than 40% of patients derive significant benefit from immune checkpoint inhibitors. And that's largely due to the complex nature of different cancers, as well as the complexity of the tumor itself and the tumor environment, so the microenvironment around them. So I'm focusing on two cancers in two cohorts of patients with cancer in this group study. So mesothelioma, which is less than 1% of all cancer cases, and the incidence is about 2,718 a year in the UK, and it's classically described as a hot tumour. So if you look at the diagram on the right, so it's showing a spectrum of tumours from cold to hot, and basically it's describing that cold tumours don't have the necessary immune cell components within the tumour microenvironment to be able for immunotherapy to act on and to act as a target to try and help boost the immune system to attack the tumour cells. So they're inherently much less likely to respond to immunotherapy compared to, on the other end of the spectrum, hot tumours, which have got lots of different immune cells within it and therefore provide a big target for immunotherapy. So mesothelioma is probably somewhere around the hot spectrum, not all the way to the end, because there is quite a degree of improvement need with immunotherapy. However, there is a licensed treatment with dual immunotherapy for advanced mesothelioma. And again, around about 40% of patients respond to this. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, pancreatic cancer, which is more common, 10th most common cancer, with an incidence of about 10,452 in the year in the UK, and it's classically a very cold tumour, which kind of goes with its prognosis being quite poor. It doesn't respond to much treatment, chemotherapy, and it has shown very little effects with immunotherapy, and that's basically because there isn't a good. It's got quite a stiff, hard environment around the tumour, and which is devoid of much immune cells, which prevents its target with immunotherapy. So that's where our collaboration with the AWRC comes in, because with the background as physical activity obviously being defined as any bodily movements that are produced by contraction of skeletal muscle and energy expenditure, and exercise being organised and repetitive bodily movements. And it's clear, and there's lots of evidence that exercise in the general population has multiple health benefits, and also in patients with cancer shown to improve survival, specifically quality of life, and cancer-related and treatment-related tiredness, fatigue can significantly be improved with exercise. And certain cancers, such as breast cancer, it's shown to reduce cancer recurrence once the radical treatment has been done. But there's lots of increasing evidence that it can boost the immune system. So there's a phenomenon called exercise-induced leukocytosis, in which one single bout of exercise can induce a big increase, a sharp and almost instant increase in circulatory white blood cells, as well as different other proteins, myokines, cytokines, which kind of is described in the diagram to the right again, along with microRNA, which all can have anti-cancer effects. Again, a large body of work shown preclinically, and more is needed to try and expand that into human studies. So the main purpose of this study is a feasibility study. So we've got these two cohorts of patients, mesothelioma and pancreatic cancer, and they are advanced, not curative stage, and they will hopefully be undergoing their first line treatment, which would be palliative. And with mesothelioma, we'd be looking at an immunotherapy cohort, and pancreatic cancer, as immunotherapy is not used at all in it, we'll be getting patients with chemotherapy to assess the effects of exercise in a non-immunotherapy cohort. But what we're really looking is it feasible? Is it acceptable? Is it practical to undergo a specific exercise regime, which I'll discuss in a bit, in these patients undergoing treatment? And on the side, we'll obviously be looking at this increase in circulatory immune modulators, and looking at how that compares to the literature in both mesothelioma and pancreatic cancer. And all of this, we hope to gain more information to provide a more robust randomized trial looking into the actual effects of exercise in improving immunotherapy response. So it's a local study based in Sheffield, and we'll be, as I work at Western Park Hospital, we'll be recruiting patients there with up to 15 patients with mesothelioma and 15 patients with pancreatic cancer. These all, as I said, would be advanced, and they'll be about to start or already started first line palliative treatment. And they will be attending the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre, and they were provided with 1 weekly supervised and 1 weekly unsupervised exercise session. So the aim is with the supervised session is to have them in groups of 3 to 4 with an exercise specialist, and the mode we've gone with is moderate intensity interval exercise bicycle, because of the literature, and we want to make things as feasible and practical as possible for these patients who can be relatively unwell, especially the pancreatic cancer patients, and as well incorporate a combination of resistance training. We will then hopefully be able to provide a personally tailored plan for the patients to do on their unsupervised exercise session. So we're hoping to carry this on for around 3 months, and that will be alongside their cancer treatment. So we'll be getting baseline and end of treatment lung function tests, looking at forced expiratory volume and maximal oxygen uptake. And as a standard of care, patients get CT scans, which are scans to assess the state of their cancer at baseline and at the 3-mark point anyway. So this study doesn't involve any extra scans, but we'll be utilizing it to actually see the effect of combination of cancer treatment and exercise, and what that's done with the in the disease response. And then specifically, we'll be doing blood tests pre and post the supervised exercise session each month. And in that circumstance, we'll be looking at the acute effects for pre and post, as well as over the 3-month period, and be looking at specific immune cell markers, myokines, cytokines, and again, comparing that to what is in the literature for other cancers. So kind of explained this slide already of what is included, but they don't have to be the fittest, but we do expect them to have a degree of physical activity which enables them to do their normal daily activities. They don't have to be regular exercises, and we would be catering with the specialist, we'll be looking at trying to do a moderate intensity which would be individualized to the patient. So if they've got another cancer, or if they've got any other comorbidities that would make it too risky to undergo the exercise regime, such as recent heart attack, or if their cancer has spread to their bones or the brain that needs initial treatment and stabilization, then that needs to be sought out first, so they won't be included. And we clearly don't want to include patients that have already progressed on immunotherapy, because we're looking at it in enhancing immunotherapy response. So the main measures are feasibility measures that we're looking at. So the adherence rate we'd be calculating by looking at the proportion of the planned exercise sessions for which were actually attended and completed. We'd be looking at the actual safety along with each of the exercise interventions, and the acceptability, so the amount of patients that were eligible and were approached, how many of them took part in the study, and we're looking at the dropout rate as well. Patient reported outcomes extremely important, obviously, in this as well. We'd be hoping to see with the exercise regimes for themselves, is their physical and mental well-being improved, has it caused any change at all, and especially with the adverse effects associated with the cancer and the treatment, just additional advice, information, whether there's any improvement there. Again, I've kind of covered this as well, but so we'll be looking at the blood markers, we'd be assessing lung function tests, and we'll be assessing imaging as a standard of care, but looking at that getting reported to a specialised criteria so we can standardise that. So we're hoping to get all of this data, and as I mentioned before, to be able to provide us information for a larger study looking more into the clinical effects of clinical potential benefits of exercise. And we do hypothesize that exercise will be a feasible and efficacious intervention, and then we're hoping that this can then go on to further to look into the immunotherapy responsive and trying to bridge those tumours up that diagram that I showed you initially, from cold tumours more to the hot side, but to show that it can increase the spectrum of tumours in which immunotherapy can be effective. And all of this we'd hope to kind of disseminate between with publications and conferences and incorporation into national guidelines, and hopefully implement this in clinical practice as a safe, efficacious and relatively cost-effective way of improving cancer care. And just lastly, I'm not sure, I think I'm probably running over a bit, but extremely important is that we want to get patient public involvement at all stages. We've already got quite a bit of involvement from the Mesothelioma UK PPI panel, the patient public involvement panel, and everyone pretty seems quite excited about it, that they're happy to do something for themselves, that they attribute physical activity to being a reason why they felt so well during their previous treatment, or why their treatment has worked well in the past. And also it's more that for them that we're doing this combination with resistance training, as there's a lot of information out there about aerobic exercise, a bit about resistance training within immune cell modulation, but there would also be something that we'd like to do and combine within this study. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Brindley.
So we've got a question in the chat. I think we've only got time for one question probably. What would you consider, or maybe you've got two very quickly, in terms of adherence rate, what would you consider to be good? And are there any plans to look at body composition from your CT scans?
So in terms of adherence rate, because you've mentioned gyms might have a 50% adherence. So again, that's something that we really need to see, because these are actually quite sick patients, so mesothelioma, pancreatic cancer patients, compared to a lot of the feasibility studies that I've done, and potentially the fitter patients. So even if they start off fit, they do get quite unwell with the treatment, along with the progression of the cancer. For example, pancreatic cancer, we expect quite a lot to progress within the first few months anyway. So a 50% adherence with throughout the 3 months would actually be relatively good for completion, but in terms of that, the specific figure, I don't think we have that right now. Something that we would discuss. And then the second question was about the CT scans.
I'm guessing that Tom's thinking, oh, if you that might be a good thing to collaborate and analyze.
Yeah, so there are plans to look at that at this moment, but actually I've done quite a bit of clinical work before it with sarcopenia and GI cancers when I was back in Manchester, and again, these are something that we're getting all the ethics for. So if we've got these images, we've got these as part of our study, then this is something that we can definitely look at.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much, that's fantastic. Thanks very much, Brindley.
Thanks,
so
Brindley.
Liam, we're on to our last speaker.
So finally, we have Tom Maden-Wilkinson, an associate professor in musculoskeletal health at Sheffield Hallam University. Take it away, Tom.
Thanks very much, Liam. So I'm just going to talk about the potential role of cancer and particular skeletal muscle, and the potential role of exercise within that. So just some declarations around kind of funding and speaker funding. So cancer-associated cachexia, we classically see this kind of loss of body weight with specific losses of skeletal muscle, as well as adipose kind of following diagnosis. This is primarily driven by a reduced food intake and also metabolic changes within the patient. It's essentially given an elevated energy expenditure, a whole host of inflammation, and this process of excess catabolism, so this loss of muscle mass. Classically, cachexia can be seen as not really fully salvageable by nutritional interventions, and rough estimates estimate that kind of 20 to 30% of all cancer deaths can be directly attributed to cachexia rather than the cancer itself. So as we're losing this muscle mass, we see an associated loss of muscle strength, ultimately reducing independence, quality of life, and ability to perform activities of daily living, in our patients, but then from a medical aspect, a increase in chemotoxicity, an increase in fatigue from treatment, and also a kind of greater risk of death as part of that. Now, there's different characterization of cachexia, and classically this framed around weight loss, particularly of kind of greater than 5%, or having a really low BMI, and as part of that. And further work has kind of identified different risk factors based on an individual's BMI at their diagnosis. So those of kind of lower BMI, a kind of much smaller amount of weight loss, kind of is a kind of really bad for overall survival. Those that don't necessarily lose a whole lot of weight tend to have much kind of better survival in those periods. So cancer, cachexia prevalence is different across different cancers, and we can expect to see differences in kind of weight loss across those cancers too. The prevalence is much higher in those kind of visceral cancers that we see, characteristically those ones that we see in the Active Together program, whereas we don't tend to see a whole lot of weight loss, particularly in the pre-advanced stages of prostate and breast cancer. There's obviously a whole host of challenges associated with cachexia, especially in clinical settings, and this is really outlined quite nicely by this diagram from Fairman et al. So not only the kind of inflammation and the pathophysiological aspects from the tumor itself, but kind of the treatment, potential kind of side effects through pain or metastases, as well as kind of nausea and vomiting further contributing to that cachexia stimulus. Now, if we look across cancers, we can see that the loss of muscle mass, in this case from CET images, is very much different across those cancers and between cancer stages. And then just to reinforce slightly, a real kind of breadth of prevalence of cachexia between different cancer types. So there's a number of reasons why this might happen, mainly from the tumor itself and the effects on body fat, also metabolism, and then directly on muscle itself. Now, the control of muscle mass in kind of healthy people is largely this balance between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. If we favor muscle protein synthesis pathways, we end up getting much larger muscles, muscle hypertrophy. And likewise, if we have more kind of muscle protein breakdown, we see atrophy in those muscles. And there's a number of clear pathophysiological processes that happen in cachexia, particularly focusing on increasing muscle protein breakdown. So we see an increase in fat infiltration within the muscle, an increase in systemic inflammation and oxidative stress, further kind of driving that catabolic state, and then changes in endothelial function affecting blood flow to the muscle. On top of that, we see this anti-anabolic stimulus, so a decrease in muscle protein synthesis, so an impaired anabolic response to both hormones and food, and then different treatment effects will also block out different anabolic hormones as part of that modality. So both cancer and its treatment are detrimental to muscle through different pathways. So you can see in this diagram, so we've got the kind of tumor in the middle will have both a kind of pro-catabolic and anti-protein synthesis kind of role, but then also those associated therapies as part of treatments of chemotherapy, hormone therapy, glucocorticoids, or radiation therapy, all are detrimental to our muscle. So what are our kind of solutions kind of away from this? We could look at pharmaceutical kind of interventions, or from a lifestyle perspective, trying to use our muscle, and particularly using resistance training has been promoted from the research literature. So if we look at the role of low skeletal muscle mass, we know that those patients undergoing a whole host of different cancer treatments tend to spend longer in hospital compared to those with normal muscle mass, have a higher post-operative mortality rate, and also from an economic point of view, cost us much more. And if we look at the survival curves, those that with low skeletal muscle mass at the point of surgery have greater mortality risk and also greater chance of relapse from their individual cancer. So there seems to be a real, certainly for hypothetically, a real case for exercise in the treatment and certainly as an adjunct treatment for cachexia. We know exercise itself is anti-inflammatory. We see an increase in mitochondria and oxidative capacity driving down that oxidative stress, as well as sufficient changes within the metabolism of the muscle, promoting us to keep hold of it. And there's a real clear case starting to emerge, particularly for resistance exercise during actual treatments. So from looking at the research literature, we know that chemotherapy results in greater loss of muscle mass from our lower limb compared to our upper limb. And different chemotherapies have different effects. So cytotoxic chemotherapy is much more detrimental to muscle than molecular therapies. However, really importantly, all the pharmacological interventions that have been attempted so far for cachexia, some have improved muscle mass, but what we can't do with those drugs so far is improve physical function. And this is really where the role of resistance training comes in. In cachectic patients, there has been evidence that progressive resistance exercise, those patients still showing improvements in muscle strength and improvement in function, even in those advanced stages. And really interestingly, and kind of showing that quite nicely, is a study by Mitchue from 2018. And they showed that exercise training, both in terms of aerobic high intensity training and resistance training, preserved muscle size during chemotherapy. And that's in both type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, in particular for resistance training. Our ability to kind of grow new muscle through satellite cells remains kind of there if we provide resistance training in accordance to that. And we can salvage our mitochondrial activity and actually improve that alongside with aerobic training alongside our chemotherapy. After chemotherapy and in towards our cancer survivors, if we look at patients that then go on to perform resistance training, they're less likely to die and have much lower all-cause mortality compared to those that don't resistance train. Interestingly, if we're thinking about the kind of pharmaceutical interventions, in particular on cancer related fatigue, you can see pharmaceutical interventions for cancer-related fatigue actually have a relatively low effect size with much more favorable kind of effect size for both psychological and exercise plus psychological treatment modalities as part of that. So there's a whole host of potential holistic benefits of physical activity in cancer patients, not only seeing that increase in muscle mass and strength, having an increase in physical function, increasing their length of survival, but a whole host of kind of knock-on benefits as part of that, both physical and psychological as part of that. However, there are a number of key barriers that we need to consider, particularly cancer-related fatigue. There might be painful muscle and joints and balance issues. There's certainly, in terms of breast cancer, worries about lymphedema, especially with resistance training of the upper limb. The downstream treatment effects on our heart, lungs, and bone will play a real key role in our abilities to exercise, as well as that some of those psychosocial barriers that others on the call are far more expert than I am. There's also then considerations around nutrition and then adding exercise as part of energy balance. And a lot of the kind of patient work that we've done has identified around kind of safety, knowing when it is safe, how kind of hard to push themselves, and also kind of how to get that knowledge and experience and through their healthcare professional, but also kind of as a patient preference as well. So there's a number of kind of future directions and also challenges as part of this work that we're looking to explore. So a kind of combination of resistance exercise and pharmacological interventions, having a look at the optimization of the resistance training stimulus, both from a patient preference, linking with Nick's work that we spoke about before, identifying what some of those biochemical changes are as part of that, as well as actually understanding the neuromuscular changes that actually occur with cachexia. One of the most kind of complicated challenges that we have, particularly from a muscle point of view, is the role of multimorbidities and especially medications to suit those, and also the kind of timing of interventions within that. So I'd just like to thank the kind of colleagues as part of this and the funders that have been part of this work. And if you have any questions, my contact details are there.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Tom. Thanks very much. So I think we just got time for one question, and then Liam in the last minute will wants to ask everybody who's still here a question before we wrap up. So Tom, I was wondering, how do you manage the fact that people who perhaps are feeling more well are able to exercise more? And so when you're looking at outcomes and relating the dose of exercise to the outcome, you've sort of got a bias in there, in that people who are a little bit weller are able to do more exercise. So how do you manage that in that sort of study?
Yeah, I think that is always going to be a challenge with this patient group compared to kind of healthy controls, where it's just like, right, come in, exercise, and kind of leave us. There's a whole host of factors. It might be a case of, say, like had chemo relatively soon before, or got kind of chemo in the afternoon, and kind of balancing around that. And I think that's one of the real kind of challenges, particularly trying to understand the mechanisms in this and that kind of efficacy of exercise to kind of balance around that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, Liam, I think over to you to wrap us up.
Yep, great. I just want to first of all thank you to all the speakers for coming along. I hope that it sort of demonstrates to everyone the sort of the breadth of the research that we have in our cancer theme, but we're always looking to develop our portfolio further. And one thing that we would like to do is have a face-to-face workshop at the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre, just to get researchers together and try and develop further projects moving forward. So I've got a really simple poll for us to do just before we leave, so then we can let you go. Just to say, and please be honest with your answer, whether you're interested in actually coming to such an event. So that should be up now, I believe. It's unanimous at the moment.
Oh, one person can't make it. That's fair enough. A couple.
Unanimous no, Liam, is it now?
Depends who's hosting.
That's fantastic. It looks like, Liam, it looks definitely like it's worth our while thinking about organising that. We were thinking about in the sort of late spring, weren't we? Yeah. So what we'll do is plan something and send out some details.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, I believe that's it for today then. So thank you everyone for attending. I hope you've learned something. I've certainly learned something. There's lots of science involved in those presentations, and hopefully we'll see you. Oh, sorry, I have one last slide, which is from Jen, which is about the next seminar, which we haven't got a date yet, but it will be announced soon, which is within the technological and digital research theme at the AWRC.